What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm your host, Van Jackson. And today I'm here obviously solo. Matt and Julia actually were ready to go at the normal scheduled time for our recording this week, but I had a bunch of bullshit to take care of and I couldn't make it. So I'm jumping solo, covering down this week, getting it in where I can be fitting it in. Basically, you know, I kind of take what we do here pretty seriously, even though it sounds like I'm riffing and shooting from the hip and, mouthing off and shit. But like, I literally hear from some of you guys that you think that what we're doing is really important and that you think we're a voice for something that you're basically not getting anywhere else. I mean, who else is even doing geopolitics as class politics? Like nobody, even people who are on our side don't look at and report on and critique the world the way we do, so um maybe that's self-aggrandizing, but it is what it is. So now I'm here. And yeah, hopefully we can get Matt and Julia back next week. We'll see. But in the meantime, there's a lot of nonsense to fucking go through this week. Too much to even handle. First off, my boy Jake Sullivan, and I don't mean that at all. Jake the Snake Sullivan, Biden's former national security advisor, the guy who fucking did more to like destroy the rules-based international order than anybody in my lifetime that's American. He is going to be a professor of the practice of statecraft and world order. That's the actual title. The Kissinger, the Kissinger professor of the practice of statecraft and world order at Harvard University. Fucking awesome. So it's too perfect in a way, you know? I remember about a year and a half ago, Graham Allison, who's a famous Harvard professor, political scientist, for whatever reason, he follows me on Twitter. I don't know that we have a ton in common, but um, he posted the advertisement for this as if it was like an open thing to apply for. Like Harvard put out the application process. They're like, here's the, requisition ID. Here's what we're looking for from the applicants. Here's where CV, letters of recommendation, all this transcripts. Like they treated this as if it was a real job that people could apply to. And at that time, I kind of like lightly, delicately trolled Graham Allison. I did it. And I asked him publicly, Graham Allison. I was like, "Hey, do you think this is going to be a job that's open to people who are critics of Washington or to critics of the Biden administration?" And he, despite following me, didn't respond. Shock. And it was a joke. Like I wasn't intending a response, and I knew what the actual response would be because I knew in that moment precisely that this wasn't a real fucking job. This is a job, like it's not a job that serious scholars can apply for or serious practitioners of grand strategy. This is a job for people who are part of the ruling class, who work on behalf of the ruling class, and who have proximity to power as a result of that. That's it. This is a payoff for power, which is what every practice related position at like an Ivy League school tends to be, you know? Um, so it was kind of a joke. I thought it was ridiculous too that like it is we've got a chair named after Kissinger, and it's hardly the only one. There's a couple of these in Washington D.C., right? SAIS has one. These are endowed positions. They're positions with money behind them, which usually means that the person that's appointed to it doesn't have to fundraise. So it's the best kind of job imaginable within academia, the most secure, the most valuable. And it goes to the fucking scumbags. It goes to the war criminals because it's named after a war criminal. Everybody knows Kissinger was a war criminal. And we name We name endowed chairs after him, you know? And so it's a joke that Jake Sullivan would come into a position that's about the practice of world order because of his role in destroying world order and facilitating a genocide in Gaza. But also there's a way in which that is what Kissinger stands for, you know? And is there a universe where a person like me is going to occupy a position with Kissinger's name on it? Fuck no. A million years, fuck no. Do you think I even fucking want that shit? That would be like torture. I'd be spray painting my own office with fucking Eat the Rich, Kissinger the war criminal. I'd be trolling myself every day if I was the Kissinger chair of fucking anything. But I don't need to worry about that because that ain't gonna happen. Fuck. This is the world we're in, man. Jake Sullivan and the way these power brokers work makes me want to be the fucking Joker. You know, it's such a joke. Like to be a guy who insists that the national security state serves the interests of the nation as a whole and who recognizes that the nation is not going to be secure unless the world is secure. And no, that's not a fucking mandate to go to war everywhere. It's the opposite. It's a mandate for fucking peace. You know, that's grand strategy. Anyway, Jake Sullivan. Next story. This one, I'll spend like 5 seconds on it. Okay. Rahm Emmanuel, who is an evil human being. I've said more about him behind the paywall in the newsletter in the past, if you want to dig up those graves. But Rahm Emmanuel, he was Biden's ambassador to Japan. He's also the brother of like Ari Emanuel, who's the character that Jeremy Piven's character is based on in Entourage, who's kind of like a sick fuck Hollywood agent guy. But Rahm Emanuel is also the sort of Machiavellian architect of the Obama years, the Obama administration. He was also like a pretty, I hear, very corrupt mayor of Chicago. And he has pretty scumbag opinions about pretty much everything. He is a sycophant for Wall Street. He represents the worst of the Democratic Party and the worst of the American political machine. But it also happens that he thinks that he's going to run for president in 2028. He's thinking about it. And I cannot think of anything worse than, or maybe appropriate, than a Democratic Party that has this guy as their standard bearer. I think the fact that like anybody would be for this, given what just happened in 2024, like one of the hallmarks of the Democratic Party at this point is the inability to learn lessons or to perceive reality as it actually exists. It's fucking insane. Like it's insane. Um, So I don't know what the fuck, dude. But Rom, like, he needs to be in exile. He needs to stay away from politics and power for the rest of his life. He has horrible views. He represents the politics of like the old Democratic Party, like unipolar moment, primacy, the Atari Democrats shit. That's his agenda. It's just power. It's just Wall Street. He's Zionist, right? So like he's all for blood spilling in Gaza, you know, um, that's just like not where the Democratic Party needs to be. The Democratic Party needs to rediscover their anti-war energy, particularly in the Trump era where we've got Trump doing land grab imperialist foreign policy. The idea that Trump can do an imperialist foreign policy and own the peace lane in politics at the same time is such a fucking joke. That's an indictment of the Democratic Party. I was on Lawfare podcast recently. I said the same thing. So now I'm doubling down on it. So fucking Rahm Emmanuel. That's all I got to say about that. Next story. This is why we're doing this, you know? Like this stuff is like incredibly frustrating, and as I go down the list of issues here, like each thing there's something maddening about this, and part of the maddeningness is that like inadequate voice is being given to critique, sound critique, analytically based critique, which also happens to converge with like a better moral position on most issues most of the time, you know. Um, so I got to speak it. Anyways, AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US agreement have it's a defense arrangement, but it's basically like a submarine deal where they added extra shit on it, right? So it's become like this vessel for all kinds of like defense technology cooperation and information sharing and a bunch of vague stuff that normal people should not be interested in, right? And that is a little suspect on the face of it, given how much like attention it's gotten and how much money it costs, right? Well, that AUKUS arrangement, the core of which is the sale of U.S. nuclear powered submarines to Australia, that was in trouble from day one. I've been warning about it from day one. I told anyone in Australia willing to listen, I'm on the record in several places, that AUKUS was too slow, it was too expensive, it was too vulnerable to the US. It tied America or Australia into American supply chains like more and more and more. It's a huge fucking problem, you know, um, especially in an era of like American volatility. And then most importantly, AUKUS had always been justified in relation to like understanding a balance of power in Asia and with China. And AUKUS never did anything to like rectify that imbalance of power, even though that was the motivation for it. So there was something in the like the logical coercion bro math of deterrence that didn't ever add up with this, you know. The only strategic bet that made any sense of AUKUS was that Australia was trying to like maximally entangle itself with the US so as to make sure that America remains in Asia. But the silliness of that is that America like is kind of embedded in Asia no matter what. Even under Trump, it's really not going anywhere. The question is, you know, to what extent is the US going to do things that increase the risks of war? That's it. You know, not whether America's willing to go to war under XYZ circumstances. It's like, are they willing to do things that increase the risks of war with their presence in Asia? And the answer to that is probably fuck yeah. But AUKUS was always on the wrong side of that equation because it is heightening risks. Therefore, it's all kind of silly. Anyway, the Australian national security bros did not want to hear this. And the irony of this now is that one, um, of the many reasons why I thought AUKUS was kind of like bullshit and destined to fail in a way was because selling Australia submarines comes at the expense of the US Navy's ability to build submarines for itself. And it's committed to building more for itself. So the US Defense Industrial Base, this is all a bunch of bullshit, but it's not its capacity, even when it's trading in just like billions and billions and billions of dollars, it doesn't have the capacity to actually do this like simultaneously expand the US submarine fleet and Australia's submarine fleet, you know. And if Australia's submarine fleet is going to come at the expense of America's naval capacity, American defense bros are not going to be down with that. And that was kind of obvious from the start, you know. And incidentally, there are like pretty right wing people, including Bridge Colby, the incoming Undersecretary of Defense for Policy under Trump, um, who shares this opinion. And so, Bridge, the number 3 position at the Pentagon, and the only one who claims any kind of like domain on Asia. I wouldn't call him an Asia expert because he doesn't know much about Asia, but like he he has been vocally opposed to AUKUS from day one. He thought it was a bad idea. And even though he loves weapons and missiles and shit, it's because of this defense industrial base thing I'm trying to explain, right? So it's so costly. It's inefficient in terms of the American, like, you know, calculation, but it does entangle Australia with the US. But entanglement with the US, that's not something anybody should want anymore. Dependency on a predatory superpower, a super predator, if you will, is not a desirable thing. Why would you want to expose your country or your people to that, you know? But on top of that, the Trump sort of foreign policy playbook is also not interested in entangling other countries unless it can absorb those other countries. So unless we're talking about Australia as the 51st state, which ain't nobody talking about in any kind of serious way, and not even the Trump administration, then there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to say here. AUKUS is fucked. And there were people who were warning about that from day one. So I don't know what to say. Anyway, I brought that up because not just the Bridge Colby thing, but because Australia's prime minister just gave a speech condemning the steel tariffs that Trump has put on Australia and not exempted them from, which is a huge deal, a huge signal, and to me, not surprising at all. Australia thought because they had a couple friendly think tank elites in Washington who were like on their side advocating for them, that somehow that was going to co-opt the Trump administration, who's doing a fucking right-wing revolution. You think they're going to make exemptions from their revolution for your steel industry? Why? Because you white? Are you fucking crazy? That's not how this works. So let me show you the Anthony Albanese thing real quick.
The United States' decision to impose tariffs on Australian steel and aluminium as part of a global decision are concerning. It has been foreshadowed that no country, regardless of its relationship with the United States, has been granted an exemption. Such a decision by the Trump administration is entirely unjustified. This is against the spirit of our two nations' enduring friendship and fundamentally at odds with the benefits that our economic partnership has delivered over more than 70 years. Australia has no tariffs on goods from the United States, and of course we have a free trade agreement with the United States. Our government will continue to put forward a very strong case for an exemption, noting that the last time this occurred, it took months for that exemption to be granted. We will advocate for Australian trade with the United States at every level and through every channel. Australia will continue working hard for a different outcome, and discussions with the Trump administration are ongoing. Our government is prepared and has been engaging directly with the Australian steel and aluminium industry, and will continue to work through this with them.
Australia is depending. They've put themselves in a strategic situation where they are dependent on the good graces of the whims of the powerful. That is not good strategy. That means you fork over strategy. That means you, in a way, you kind of like compromise your own sovereignty. And so one of the reasons, this is all very predictable, you know, and if Australia shits the bed, it's going to have to sleep in that bed, you know. But I'm in New Zealand. I'm next door. I'd like it if they didn't have to eat shit, you know? And one of the ways in which Australia might end up eating shit because of this is that, like, their next election in Australia is going to be, in a lot of ways, a foreign policy election. And what that means is that the party that bear hugs a psychopath America, the super predator America, they're gonna find themselves getting voted out or voted down, you know. And so Anthony Albanese, a Labor Party prime minister, if Labor is bear hugging the super predator, they're gonna lose, right? That's how this shit's gonna go down. So it's quite possible that their opposition puts forward an agenda, put in a candidate that is even more pro-US. That's totally possible. You know, it's quite possible that mainstream Australian politics is like strategically bankrupt. I wouldn't put it past them, right? But in that case, if the Australian center right really doubles down on embracing MAGA and on embracing the American far right and on embracing American counter-revolution, even despite the disaster it's raining on the world, even despite it reeking of imperialism in 2025, if the Australian right still embraces Trump, despite all that, Labor will have no ability to critique them for that if they have also been embracing Trump and MAGA. So do you see, this is a shadow of the same problem that the American Democrats had. Australian Labor and the American Democrats, the Democrats got fucked because they gave up the ability to advocate for peace and against militarism. They gave up the ability to advocate for sanity in the world because they had embraced the national security state. And that meant that Trump, of all people, could lie out of his face about anti-militarism and being against war and stuff. And the Democrats couldn't critique him for it. And a version of that is going to happen in Australia for sure, unless Labor gets its shit together and starts to recognize what's happening in the Europe and with the UK and with Canada relative to the United States. Okay. For the sake of the world, we need a saner US foreign policy, and we're not going to get it from the US. We're going to get it from others functioning as a kind of non-aligned block. You know, God save the world, not the Queen. All right. So, next story. I wrote a piece actually. I don't think I have it here. Yeah, goddamn. I don't have it here. I wrote a piece in the newsletter, un-diplomatic.com. It was called America's Coming Great Depression. And it was really like, I think a lot of people know that the economy is in trouble, at least if you're paying like even a little bit of attention. But I started like working through the checklist of indicators of like, how bad is it, Because like in the Biden years, the policy wonks, the econ progressive policy people, a lot of them straight up fucking lied to us with numbers, lied to us about telling us how good the economy was. And I wrote a thing at that time, like an immiseration index, all these different indicators of economic insecurity and how desperate people were. And I thought I ended up, and it was a tragic, horrible picture. Like Americans are not doing well in the main. And it tends to be that the right wing benefits from that because there is no left wing in American politics. But the thinking through the sort of like indicators of immiseration, not just employment versus unemployment, but like wage growth relative to productivity, which is in the shitter, economic insecurity in the form of housing insecurity or food insecurity, having, losing your job, medical bills, having multiple jobs in order to pay rent, debt default, which has been surging. We're in like record levels of that, So like there are all these different indicators that normal progressive econ wonks were not paying attention to because they wanted to cheerlead for Biden mindlessly and dupe the rest of the white collar class that's doing okay, while a lot of people suffered. And I knew this was wrong because I would listen to like a lot of like podcasts from the culture and shows that are from the culture that like normal wonks do not pay attention to. And like the people in hip hop or who giving voice to like an urban experience or the hood, whatever you want to call it, they were all explaining how they're fucking done with Biden. They was done with Kamala. And a lot of it is because like there wasn't anything in any of that Bidenomics shit for them. And they were getting squeezed. And inflation is part of it, but it's like inflation plus the vibes, plus what have you done for me? Because all of Bidenomics, there was a stimulus check at the front end of the Biden years, but starting in 2022 with the IRA, Biden turned to fucking austerity, and the policy wonks wasn't narrating that shit, but the streets was, and that's sort of what I was keying off of. So I was trying to give voice to that sentiment. But that's all to say that like Trump has inherited actually like a really bad / precarious economic situation, right? It's not like it was all good and then Trump came. Like things were not good. That's why Trump came. And now Trump's making it way fucking worse, dude. So We've only been in office like 2 months. And it's like, okay, first, Trump's war on immigrants, it's massively curtailing the labor supply in the agricultural sector for the US, right? So I'm reading all these stories now about ag workers not showing up for work out of fear of ICE raids at their workplace, which is happening more and more and more. So you got places like Bakersfield, California, which is like an agricultural center, and you got shortages of workers. So who's picking the fucking strawberries, cuz, you know? And so what we're talking about here is a labor shock in the agricultural sector, right? That matters because it causes a spike in food prices. Everybody, last time I checked, has to consume fucking food, bro. And so that hits everybody, but it affects poor folks and economically insecure folks more than, of course, the oligarchs, right? So that's happening. At the same time, Trump's Doge bullshit is directly and deliberately expanding the unemployment rolls uh, by furloughing hundreds of thousands of workers, federal workers, right? And there's a ton of people who have not lost their jobs yet, but who are afraid they're going to lose their jobs. And when you cast that kind of shadow of the future, that dark, like ominous possibility over the horizon, it makes people be miserly. You know, they don't spend, they don't expand credit, they don't take big risks on building businesses and shit like that. So Trump is creating this dark shadow of the future on top of whatever direct unemployment he's causing by fucking furloughing people, right? Third, Trump and congressional Republicans, they're attacking the social safety net in a way that is like very common for Republicans to do, but they're being super fucking extra about it, right? So I've never seen this level of savagery against the welfare state. I mean, the closest is probably Reagan, but this is worse than that. So we're talking right now about uh, it's in draft legislation form, but $4.5 trillion in tax cuts that are targeted at corporations and plutocrats, right? For workers under 150K a year salary are going to get a tax cut also, but that's going to be offset by the rise in fucking food prices and inflation because of tariffs. So I'll get to tariffs in a second, right? But we're talking 4.5 trillion tax cuts that go to the fucking oligarchs and the tech bros and multinational corporations. And at the same time, they're cutting SNAP benefits, food stamps, right? They're cutting Medicaid to the bone. They're touching the third rail. Medicare, Social Security, dude. They're going after even the third rail shit. They're trying to do a reverse FDR. Mark Andreessen even said that. That was his phrase, reverse FDR, right? So this is what the counter revolution looks like as a matter of policy, right? But what this means is that like the basic social construct that justifies the existence of the state itself is being renegotiated. But without a negotiating partner. It's just happening. It's being imposed, right? And so American taxpayers, they've been paying into Social Security. They've been paying into Medicare, right? Now those things are being gutted, and Elon Musk in particular wants to like actually kill them. Will he be successful? I don't know. A lot of things depends on how much noise you're making in the streets about shit, you know. But then, so those are like what I've done, three things that are like feeding the already precarious economy, right? This siege on immigrant labor, the labor supply shock from immigration, the unemployment, the expansion of unemployment because of Doge, right? And then the savaging of the welfare state to actually support people and supplement the shit wages that most people at the bottom get, right? Or to help when they go unemployed. And then on top of that, Trump is establishing what everybody covers in the capitalist newspapers, this regime of global tariffs, right? There's a possibility that like in the Australia case, what they're hoping for is like, let's show that we are loyal to this neo-patrimonial regime, which is to say fucking gangsterism, right? You kiss the ring of Don Corleone, maybe he gives you a favor. That's what like Australia's foreign policy at the present is positioning itself for like to beg for a dispensation while the rest of the world burns. How about you try to do something for the world instead of just for your narrow self? You know what I mean? So Trump's regime of global tariffs, as everybody knows, I don't need to belabor this point now, they're attacks on consumers, right? They're increasing the prices of consumption on top of the immigration supply shock, labor shock, right? So ultimately, Trump is making it harder to make, like, if you're a foreign firm, you know, you make wine or some shit in another country, I don't know. They're making it harder to sell that into the US market because your prices are going to be super uncompetitive. And the thing that like would make you get around this is if you relocate your production to the US to facilitate entry into the US market. And there's a way in which like that might be the sane bet of Trump's tariffs, but what it's really doing is like deterring foreign companies from even just selling into the US market in the first place. Like America is not looking like a super attractive place to sell, you know, and that's contrary to like the romantic image that people have of America. So let me just show you this chart real quick because it bears on this discussion indirectly. I had a different piece in the newsletter recently where I showed this. I can't remember what it was titled, but it was really like trying to think through what does it look like for countries to like basically de-align from the US, you know? The hegemon is imploding. So like how does the world kind of adapt to that? And the Financial Times, you know, they're looking after their bottom line like they're the smartest capitalist newspaper there is. They had this and they've had a couple other stories since, but they're looking at this question actively, very smartly in fact. And what they show, like in this graph here, you know, key economies in the world system, they're all connected to the US economy, but their exposure to the US, if the US creates giant tariff walls or implodes or something or goes into a civil war, their exposure to the US is not nearly what you would think, right? Other than Mexico, every other country, major economy, can get on without the US market, right? There's some adjustment here, some adjustment. I'm not saying that would be painless, but these countries can survive. You know, these countries can build a new a new like arrangement of economic flows or financial architecture in the world system if they can't get into the US market. And because of the strategic risks of trying to get into the US market, they have incentives to diversify as much as humanly possible. Even Australia, even Albanese, he seemed a little bit, I don't know if I should say this out loud, he seemed a little pathetic in that speech about the steel tariffs. But even that guy was like, look, we're trying to diversify our trade relationships. Like that was an important thing that he wanted to stand on. It's like, oh, you're so tough. Anyway, so all this to say is like the world is not as exposed to the US or as dependent on the US as Washington supposes. You know, adaptation, de-alignment, non-alignment, diversification, all that shit can happen at an acceptable price. And America's global tariff regime, right? This approach of like one versus all is alienating people, alienating countries, you know? So that's that. What else? What else? Talking myself hoarse here. Uh, oh, this is interesting. This will be real quick. Just on the Asia beat, you know, the Philippines, there was a news story about the Philippines, their president, Bongbong Marcos, son of the kleptocrat Ferdinand Marcos. He announced that the previous president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, who was like a bit of a psycho, you know, certainly like tyrannical. He basically ordered a bunch of extrajudicial killings and suppressed, you know, free speech and free press and everything. It was a bad scene, a bad scene. And the International Criminal Court had an arrest warrant for him. And after some back and forth, the current government decided to like turn Duterte over to the International Criminal Court. So let me play this real quick.
Rodrigo Roa Duterte, took off at 11:03 p.m. this evening and exited Philippine airspace. The plane is en route to The Hague in the Netherlands, allowing the former president to face charges of crimes against humanity in relation to his bloody war on drugs. The former president was earlier placed in government custody at Villamor Air Base after his common-law wife, Hanilet Avancenia, and members of his entourage arrived at 9:20 this morning from Hong Kong on Cathay Pacific flight number CX-907. Mr. Duterte was arrested in compliance with our commitments to Interpol. Hours before his arrival, Interpol Manila received an official copy of the ICC warrant. This prompted the Prosecutor General of the Department of Justice to serve the warrant. Interpol asked for help, and we obliged because we have commitments to the Interpol, which we have to fulfill. If we don't do that, they will no longer help us with other cases involving Filipino fugitives abroad. This is what the international community expects of us as the leader of a democratic country that is part of the community of nations. So I'm sure that the details that surround this what has happened today are familiar to you. I just wanted to make very, very clear and give you the facts from.
You get the point. So, the only thing I have to say about this is like, it's a smart and kind of predictable thing that the Philippines would turn over Duterte. So you're turning over a former head of state to the International Criminal Court. But of course, the Philippines is in a position of actually, as much as it depends on its alliance with the US, it depends on international law even more in a way. You know, like they have had international tribunal rulings in its favor when it comes to the South China Sea dispute with China, right? So international law, in a sense, is on the Philippines' side in a bigger worldly sense. And it's like strategically, cosmically, the Philippines is wise to stay on the correct side of international law, and that means fulfilling an arrest warrant from the ICC. The thing I would add is that, like, Bongbong Marcos, the president there, he kind of presented this as like, look, we have an obligation under international law. Or it's like the other versions of this is like, look at the Philippines, they're doing rules-based international order. And that is not wrong, but it misses the reality of like the Philippines politics. The Philippines it's ruled by like 30 families. It is kind of an oligarchy with elections also, just like America. So it's like, just because you identify as a democracy doesn't mean you don't have oligarchic features. You know what I mean? And so a country that's run by a few handfuls of families, like that is, you'd see evidence of that in its politics. And in fact, you do. So the Duterte family is basically a new political aristocracy now, right? Which is why Rodrigo Duterte's daughter is the vice president. But and Bongbong Marcos is, of course, the son of the kleptocrat Ferdinand Marcos. So that's a power family, power broker family. The Dutertes and the Marcoses fucking hate each other. Okay. So we're talking about something worse than like Capulets and Montagues. And that matters because if you're trying to do dirty to your rival, your op politically, it's by any means necessary. Well, it turns out your op is wanted by the International Criminal Court. So of course you're going to turn them over. So what I'm saying is, like, if you care about international law, it's good what the Philippines did here. Turn over Duterte, don't protect that fucking guy. But let's be clear-eyed and let's be a little cynical, please. It's needed when it comes to understanding why they did it. Who benefits from this, right? Well, in the family feud of Philippine oligarchic politics, this this was a this was a fantastic knife in the back to your op. You know what I mean? And you get to sell it to the world community as rules-based international order shit. So it's kind of win-win, you know? The last thing I want to go over here is like this emerging war on terror that is basically coming for us all. And this is some scary shit. You know, like if you're a fucking well-meaning lib, you probably recognize that the war on terror was like very costly, but you probably don't sufficiently appreciate how much the war on terror was actually existing fascism from the perspective of Arab and Muslim Americans. You know, to be Arab or Muslim or even Muslim looking, you know, Sikhs got targeted in America too because of like who where you're from or like what religion you have, and to make that the FBI go after you for that shit, you know, or like to experience low key racism on the daily. Like that was part of the war on terror. You know, Richard Beck has a good book about this. It features a little bit in Spencer Ackerman's book too. But basically, the war on terror was like fascism within democracy, you know. And now we're about to experience what it's like for the war on terror to go after us. And we're seeing new indications of this. Like that's how we need to be thinking about this, right? So everybody knows, I hope, about the story of Mahmoud Khalil. So the Columbia University student with a green card, hadn't broken any laws, was not charged with breaking any laws, married to a US citizen who's 8 months pregnant, and he got fucking jacked up and detained by ICE in the middle of the night, swifted away to fucking detention. At first, nobody knew where. He got disappeared. But then we found out he was in Louisiana, right? And the grounds on which ICE did this was basically a 1952 McCarthyist Cold War kind of anti-communist hysteria law that gave the Secretary of State the power, Immigration and Nationality Act, gave the Secretary of State the ability to say like, oh, if this person, they can be identified as alien to the U.S. and therefore deportable if they, if we think that they could act adverse to American foreign policy interests or have adverse consequences for American foreign policy interests. That was the exact wording of the law, right? That's a bunch of fucking nonsense. That's not a standard at all. Like, what are foreign policy interests? You know, what are adverse foreign policy consequences? That's about American power accumulation. You know, that's witch hunt shit. That can be applied to anybody at any time. You're not safe. You're not safe just because you're a natural born citizen. I don't know if you heard, Trump wants to remove natural born citizenship rights. Like, don't think that you're fucking safe from predation. You know, that was the mistake of the war on terror. A lot of well-meaning libs were happy to get on and live a normal life while fascism was going on in their midst. And now it's coming back around again, round two. This time they're going after the fucking peace protesters. So if you happen to be a fan of peace, you just might be got after. You know what I mean? So where the shit gets scary, there was a DHS Deputy Secretary, Troy Edgar. He went on NPR, National Public Radio, and he basically said protest is terrorism. So I want to play this for you real quick. It's just 1 minute, and it's expanding the net of fascism, dude. There's just nothing.
And you go through at any point.
Is any criticism of the government a deportable offense?
It's like I said, you know, as a student, he comes to the United States on a student visa, applies. Well, let me put it this way, Michelle. Imagine if he came in and filled out the form and said, I want a student visa. they asked him, "What are you going to do here?" And he's like,
he was
"I'm
a
going
student.
to go and protest and
So is
join an
protest a
anti-Semitic
deportable
activity."
event?
We would never have let him into
Is
the country.
protesting a deportable offense?
Like I said, you're focused on protesting. I'm focused on this visa process. He went through a legal process, came into the country.
Are you saying that he lied on his application? He's a lawful permanent resident married to an American citizen.
Well, I think if he would have declared he's a terrorist, we would have never let him in.
And what did he engage in that constitutes terrorist activity?
Boom.
I mean, Michelle, have you watched it on TV? It's pretty clear.
No, it isn't. Well, explain it to those of us who have not, or perhaps others have not. What exactly did he do?
Well, I think it's clear, or we shouldn't be talking about it. I mean, the reality is that if you watch and see what he's done on the university,
do you not know? Are you telling us that you're not aware?
He had nothing. It was tautology. It was circular reasoning. Oh, we wouldn't be talking about this if he wasn't a terrorist. What kind of answer is that? That's a fucking non-answer. It's like state propaganda, you know? So people are freaking out about this Mahmoud Khalil case. They're right to freak out about it. But the biggest issue here is that they're conflating protest and terrorism, right? So there's a way in which this is about free speech, which should be constitutionally protected, which goes to the core of American identity, right? But it's also like way bigger than fucking free speech, you know, way bigger. Because if you can't protest, then you can't contest power. If you can't contest power, then you just live under fucking fascism or totalitarianism. You know, you certainly are not in a democracy. So we have to, like, the Khalil moment, and the people freak out because on some level they finally understand that this shit can happen to you even if you're not breaking laws. And so if we want to stop more of us from being treated like Khalil, I mean, he needs to get freed, first of all, but like to stop more of that from happening, we have to actually repudiate the global war on terror and its underlying logic. Because in fact, America did disappear a ton of Muslims in America who were immigrants, green card holders because of the war on terror shit. They have precedent for doing this, you know, and that can't stand. So we have to repudiate the global war on terror and reject that logic because it doesn't provide security for fucking anybody, right? We also have to contest the legitimacy of these fucking puppets, these MAGA puppets like Marco Rubio. Rubio is the one who authorized this by designating Khalil as adverse, aligned to Hamas, or, you know, whatever. I forget whatever the fucking language is, but like, that's that bullshit. And you know why Rubio is Secretary of State? Because the Senate voted unanimously to confirm his ass. And it was obvious he was just going to do this puppet Muppet shit. Of course, he's a sycophant of power, you know? So we got to reject the war on terror and the logic, recognizing that it is a source of insecurity for us. We have to challenge the effectiveness, the legitimacy of the puppets and let them call them out as such, not take them intellectually seriously, you know? And then we really need to sort of like make a break from Cold War liberalism. Cold War liberalism created this legal precedent that's being used, you know, and that was bullshit. It was a bullshit law in the 1950s. It was just a product of McCarthyism at the time. Red Scare, second Red Scare. So that gave us that tool, and it's that fucking tool. It's that mindset, that paranoia that creates that tool that takes away our freedom, that denies us security. And we don't have to live like this, you know? And this sure as shit is not democracy. Democracy for whom? For fucking strategic crypto reserve holders? That's not democracy, dude. That's not democracy. Okay. I think I've said enough today. I hope you enjoyed this or got something out of it. I hope you're righteously angry. This is a time to not be silent. This is a time to not sit still. This is a time to move, to contest power, to do what you can, to protest, to sign statements, whatever. You know, this is a time to, history is turning on what we do in the Khalil case, but in every case. So let's fucking live and live for each other, you know? And also go to un-diplomatic.com. All right. Thanks. Peace.